Good evening. Welcome to day 5 of the Jaipur Dialogues. As you can see, we've got an all star panel today talking about the Indian economy in the 21st century. And obviously, my speakers don't need any introduction. So, without much ado, I'm going to give each one of our speakers 10 minutes to make opening remarks. Feel free to cover any aspect, and then we'll do a discussion for about 30 to 45 minutes after we go into the audience questions. So, Mohandas sir, starting with you, 10 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Abhijit. I want to start with looking at the global economy and what we could see in the next maybe 10 years. COVID-19 has been an inflection point in the global economy and is accentuating the trends that we see. Let me just explain what I mean. The global economy is seeing a shift in economic power, with China becoming a very, very dominant world power. 24% of global manufacturing comes from China. The global supply chain leads to China, and COVID has demonstrated the power of China. China is impacting every single country on the globe. The US economic power is diminishing. The US GDP as a percentage of global GDP has come down to 25% and may decline because Asia is growing faster, Sub-Saharan Africa is growing faster, and China, of course, is continuing to grow at 4 to 5%. So we are seeing a shift in global economic power. Of course, the financial power, military power remains with the US for a long period of time. We're seeing the decline of Europe, primarily because Europe is not going to grow. In the next 10 years, Europe may grow at about 1.5%, China at 4.5 to 5%, the US may be 2 to 2.5%, India may be 5 to 6%, and Africa may grow at maybe 5.5, 6%, and the rest of Asia maybe 3 to 4%. So this decade is going to see the shift of economic power to Asia led by China. Of course, the West will try to bring down China, but China will continue to grow its internal economy. The second important thing that we see is the aging of the West. You know, the average age in Western Europe is 47 years. Japan is about 47 years. China is 31. The US is 31. India is 27. And so when you have an older economy, you don't have enough young people to produce for older people, and that is going to reduce growth. And social security spending will go up in Europe. Europe with spending 40% of the world's social spending, with 25% of the world's population in the West. So I think that is a very, very big challenge. And Japan is aging; its population is actually shrinking, and the US is going through its own catharsis with the non-white population coming into majority by 2045, and we're seeing the impact. So aging is certainly a big fact, and globally, the world population may only come to 9.6 billion by 2011 because fertility is down all around the world. And India's fertility is now 2.0 as we speak right now. The third important thing is the surge in global liquidity because of COVID is going to mean interest rates are going to be quite low for the next maybe 5-7 years. Out of $38 billion of the government bonds in the OECD, 18 billion were below were negative rates before the COVID, and now we'll have possibly, when this ends, 12 to 15 billion dollars of stimulus. That means the total bonds by the OECD may go to 50-55 billion, and maybe 60-70% will be below positive rates. And that means the surge of global liquidity is not going to go away, and that means huge amount of money is going to outflow from the US markets and European markets trying to find yields, and that has great repercussions on pensions and asset values all around the world. The next important point you must learn globally is that there is going to be an impact on global politics because of the demographic change, because of the huge surge of liquidity and the rise of Asia. Now, what about India? Well, India between 1950 to 1980 grew at about 3.5%, the Hindu rate of growth, with population growing at maybe 2.1%. When Rajeev Gandhi came and opened up, borrowing went up from 20 billion to 80 billion from 1980 to 1990, but we grew at 5.5%. But from 91 till 2020 March, India has grown at 8.5% from 275 billion to 2.93 trillion, with population growing at maybe 1.6%. So we really saw per capita income growing up at about 6.3%, 7.2% or so during this period, which is very, very good. That means per capita income doubled. So this decade, we may grow to maybe $5 trillion by 2026 and maybe to something like $10 trillion by 2031, growing at about maybe 6.5 to 7% in real term, inflation 10%. But the GDP in dollars will depend upon the dollar rate. When the government gave the target of 5 trillion, Sanjeev Sanyal said the government took the dollar rate at 75 to a dollar, but we have $570 billion of reserves. So the rupee may remain stable for the next maybe 3 to 4 years. So India has got good growth prospects led by consumption, which is 70% of India's GDP growth, and 30% is coming from investments. Now, how do we see investments coming in? Well, this year is a bad year, so we got to look at this year as a break year. But India has a huge deficit in infrastructure. So infrastructure investment will go up, interest rates have come down, and I believe interest rates will remain down because even though inflation is high, we must remember that inflation is driven by onion prices and potato prices, because 46% of CPI based on 2010-11 wage are based on food. And between 2011-12 and 2020, our GDP has possibly gone up 3x. That means the wages have to come down. And today, as per the latest surveys, food is just 30%. And we must remember that 950 million people in this country are living on less than $2 a day. So for them, whether onion prices go up or tomato prices goes up won't make a difference. And for the balance who are lower middle class and maybe middle class by Indian terms, they're not a very large part of your daily budget. So we got to get our statistics together. So will we have investments? Yes, the government's focus on investment, the inflow of money and labor reforms and everything else that has been done will drive investment going forward in the next maybe 10 years. Will consumption go up? For consumption to go up, we need to have infrastructure, which will go up. We've got good programs. About 110 lakh crores is a national infrastructure program, and government has got funding for 75%. The balance will come along. And with the surge of liquidity from the West and from the other markets, I will see investments going up too. And consumption will be driven by investments, and consumption will be driven by growth in jobs. Now, what about jobs? Now, I think, if we look at jobs, we must look at data. Even CMIE, which had come with a huge number in unemployment, says the latest numbers are for the last week, unemployment is just at 5.5%. Now, we have about 250 million people in agriculture. The big challenge for India has been that agriculture makes up 17% of GVA, but 43% of people depend on agriculture. And it means that agriculture has a disproportionate number of people. Now, if you look at data again, for the last 20 years, agriculture employment has come down from 60% to 43%. It's declining at 1% a year. 1% a year is pretty good. So by 2030, people depend on agriculture could come down to something like 30%. And that is very, very good. So I think, jobs are going to be created in the formal sector. The formal sector employs about 100 million people on payroll. Government has got 25 million, 2.5 crores. The PF is got something like about 60 million, that's 8.5. And ESI has got about maybe 2.5 crores, but 1 crore is along with PF. So there are about 100 million people, and that's growing possibly with about 45, 50 lakhs a year. And you can see the data in the PF data, they're raising monthly figures across things. So we've got to learn to analyze the data to see where jobs are. But where are jobs coming from? To my mind, jobs are coming from the services sector, because the services sector is close to 60% of GDP. And I think that is where the growth is going to come. And manufacturing is now going to take off because of government has got the policy right. First of all, they brought in labor reform, which is very good. We're going to have the new code from January. Second, they got in reforms in the MSME to allow MSMEs to grow. They reduce the interest rates, MSMEs will get more credit for investments. And they got the PLI scheme. The PLI scheme is extremely good because for the first time, government has understood if you want manufacturing, you got to reduce supply chain costs by the GST and better transportation within India to make India competitive. Second, you got to lower interest rates, so the cost of capital will come down, with that done by making sure that the government bond market has a lower interest rates and flooding the market, the liquidity, which is essential, and not tightening liquidity in a country where real interest rates are very high at one point of time. And the third thing that they have done is to make sure that corporate tax rates are down. corporate taxation of 15% for new manufacturing plants and 25% for the corporate world. And that will reduce cost of capital. If you have a cost of capital of 13%, you're not going to get great investments. You've got to reduce the cost of capital to something to 10 to 11% when inflation is about 3.5%, 4%, because you've got to get a real rate of return to take care of the risk involved in investments. So I think the government has got its act right, and the PLI is going to drive all this in a pretty big way. Now, India should have a particular strategy for developing, for creating jobs and developing its economy. Let me take agriculture. You'll be surprised that India is surplus in cereals. We're the second largest growers of wheat, second largest growers of rice, and we are almost self-sufficient in pulses. We are self-sufficient in other cereals. Yes, in oil seeds, we are slightly deficit, but with bitter prices, we're going up. Now, India can become a supplier of agriculture products to the rest of the world. We already export about $45 billion a year. We can take it up to $100 billion if we get our act right. In vegetables, we are the second largest. In fruits and vegetables at 310 million funds, the largest in milk at 170 million tons, and we are the largest in spices. In most areas, in sugar, we are the largest. In most areas, we are large. So we've got to have an export trust on agriculture. And I think that's happening with a lot of startups connecting farmers to markets, and farmers should get better prices to incentivize them to grow. Whenever prices have gone up, farmers have produced. So I think that is a problem that we have to solve by having an export trust, because India cannot consume so much that we produce, and if we produce too much, prices come down. So we need the export trust. The second area is in manufacturing, and I spoke about how the PLI is going to transform, led by the manufacturing focus on electronics, led by the manufacturing focus on high tech, and the manufacturing focus on steel and traditional commodity-led industry. The next important thing for us is export of services. The IT industry exports $150 billion, and India has got a fantastic startup industry with more than 50,000 startups, and they're growing much, much bigger. And they're going to be the drivers of efficiency, because the IT will create greater efficiency and greater benefits to industry, and they should be able to use that. So my personal view is India will experience high growth in the next 10 years. India will become much more efficient in supply chain. India will be a larger part of the global economy and can export. And Indian industry in COVID has cut down the cost. You're seeing their EBITDA margins go up in the last quarter. You're seeing growth come back. And I think in future they'll learn that they have to export in the global market to produce. What did China do to become a global exporter?
Time.
I'll just finish in a minute, 1 minute.
Yeah.
What China did was very interesting. China said they were going to produce for the world, and they set up contract manufacturing in a large way to produce to the world. Now, Indian industry has learned how to do contract manufacturing, and that's going to go. So I want to end by saying I'm very optimistic. We are on the right track. And in this decade, when the global economy changes, India is changing, and India will address the global market. I've seen it happen, and I am very, very optimistic.
Thank you, sir. Vibhuti, sir, you're up next. 10 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Abhijit. And I want to thank Jaipur Dialogues for hosting this event. I have watched most of the sessions in the last 5 days. I call this session is the economy stupid session. And, it's a very important session because, Mohan has already told you the statistics that India's future looks good. And he's given you all the data. And my thought process is, having been on this side of the fence, having been deeply involved with the Indian economy, how are we going to do it? And if I were any closer to Prime Minister, I would say that having achieved so much on the political front, on the economy front, I would say that his primary ambition and mission and goal has to be that the demographic dividend of India, which Nandan Nilekani talked about several years ago, cannot be allowed to become a demographic burden. That is, in my opinion, the mission statement for the current government, that the demographic dividend cannot be allowed to become a demographic burden if we do not take into account how to develop that talent pool. So India is not a resource deficient country. We are a remarkably resource rich country. We have not converted our resources into capital in the way that we ought to have done. So, for example, human resources part of it. We have great human resources, intellect, wisdom, knowledge. Have we converted that into a human capital or not? That's the key issue that we have to come to the effect. Now Make in India is a great initiative, but Make in India will not happen, will not succeed if our talent pool is not there to be ready to participate in the manufacturing revolution that Prime Minister intends to do to make India a manufacturing hub for the world. And for that, as in many panels of Jaipur Dialogues we have talked about, we need a structural shift here. We need a thinking shift here, because that mindset shift is important. So, for example, in our country, we have not developed the respect for jobs. We look down upon occupations. That somebody is a kumhar, somebody is a chamar, and I told a taxi driver who was a chamar that next life I would hope to be born as a chamar with the talent and ability to create a Nike and Adidas in India. So we have not developed our local pool in such a way that innovation, leadership, entrepreneurship achieves its potential. So we know one thing for sure, that in the last as many years, the entire world is talking about India as an opportunity. But India has failed to meet its potential. And that's this structural shift that India needs to take a definite step forward to. If we are going to build a manufacturing base, then we have to have the manufacturing talent, skill development, to be able to, fit into what the world demands of us. I remember a conversation in the Indian consulate here. It was a very important day. That was the day when in China and US had a trade deficit of $42 billion. There were several Americans were telling me, why don't you at least take 10% of what is going to China? You would have built a counterbalance and you would have built a manufacturing base in India. But at that time, our bureaucracy was not inclined, our political system was not inclined to taking advantage of the opportunity. So we have adequate knowledge, experience, wisdom, everything else, but we have not translated that into a real effective solution for ourselves. So let's take another example. Einstein said, two things of Einstein stands by me, and I follow that part, that any intelligent fool can complicate a simple problem. It takes courage to move in the other direction. So if we always like to solve big problems, and if we don't take care of the small things, the big problems remain big. And the second part is that we have to talk about the efficiency factor. We know that technology has caused tectonic shift in the world around us. It has created an interdependence of the economies. 1987, for example, I was in American Express office in Delhi. The Wall Street crash did not even feel a pinch in India. Today, an oil movement here, a geopolitical event there affects everyone. So we in India, we have to learn to be engaged with the process, with the world around us, and not necessarily import ideas, but develop our own ethos. This is a very personal conversation when I was in India talking to a major CEO, chairman of a public sector undertaking. He told me, why don't you bring us the best practices of industrial relations, human relations, and personal policy from all over the world? And I asked him very simple, we Indians need to develop our own ethos. Which best practice will work for India? Mongolia, San Francisco, British, German? No, but we have to learn from one simple fact, that Germany and Japan were annihilated post Second World War, right? Today, they are the samples of quality of products, and they are the world powers in economy. Why can't we become one? We haven't developed. In one of the panels, people talked about language, that Germany, France, they use their own language to develop their technology and their processes. We have forgotten that art. We forget something very simple, that India was once upon a time known as a golden bird without English. Think about it like that. English had no role to play, but we let our values go down because the narrative was created by somebody else. That was another subject matter we talked about in Jaipur Dialogues, and I'm very happy about it, because I have said many times that if we don't build our own narrative, others define us, and in the process, we lose values. So Sanskrit has to be made, in my opinion, solutions are all there. Sanskrit has to be made as part of a school curriculum, which I learned in my school in Netherhat in Bihar. So we had English medium only two. I learned English when I came to college. I was not English medium. हमने तो अंग्रेजी भी हिंदी माध्यम में सीखी है भाई साहब. So what I want to say to you is that we have to bring about certain processes in our cultural inhibitions and drop them and move forward with our own ethos. The other part is also very important. You cannot, the definition of insanity is you keep doing the same thing, hoping for a different result. So think about it like this. The bank NPAs in India or Air India, they're two classic examples where the only effort to revive these two sectors of NPA has been pumping more money in the system. It hasn't solved the problem. The problem lies somewhere else. NPA is my favorite topic because I started working on it 12 years ago. And NPA is the lethargy of the banks, the inefficiencies in the system has caused this entire problem of waste of resources. So we have to bring about in 21st century going forward, performance, productivity, and profitability as our mool mantra. Because if you do not perform, it doesn't matter what else you do. Performance means everything in boardroom, battlefield, sports field, everywhere. It's performance alone that matters. Profit is not a bad word, but it has been used in an evil fashion so that, we don't want to make money as if it is considered to be an evil thing. Don't do that. It is an element of business that if you do not generate surpluses, you do not have enough to invest in. And finally, on this part, I would also say, Abhijit, you hosted a wonderful session with the Chief of Armed Forces. 4 brilliant generals were there in that. And I learned my life lessons from sports and armed forces. These are the two arenas in the world where human potential is pushed to its final limits. You have to be practicing being in the ever readiness condition. India going forward has to imbibe the values of armed forces and sporting field that we have to perform. If you are run out, nobody says, "Acha ek baar aur batting kar lo yaar." You have to understand the virtue of sports because you have to be in a constant state of readiness to mobilize resources, to coordinate resources, and collaborate with various sectors to grow forward. India needs to do that on an urgent basis to move forward because 21st century does belong to India. I'm an eternal, optimist about India. I'm a great believer that India's time has come, and that will happen only if we are able to make structural shifts. Knowledge, intelligence, everything is there, but we have to go into the Bhagavad Gita's lesson of action. Unless and until we begin becoming an action-oriented country, things will perish. So if you want to export-oriented, you have to have a concept of quality. There is no way you can avoid focusing on quality. Remember, India has the highest number of Deming-Durand certified engineers, but we missed out on quality. That's what we Indian entrepreneurs have to focus on. And final point which I want to make is the understanding of the economic and political structure is very key. Democracy is a great tool of political governance. It's the least efficient way to run a business because democracy is all about counter checks and balances. Business needs the flourish of growth because you do not need, MohanD and all of us are part of the entrepreneurial culture. We know that to grow, you need controls and everything else, but you need an unfettered ability to grow positively. And that's the point which I'm trying to drive at, is that we have to imbibe the sporting culture, we have to imbibe the military culture, performance-driven economy.
Sir, time.
I ended.
Sorry, I'm having internet problems, so if you see me go off, I'm sorry about it. Just generally, when your time's up, I'm just going to do 2 minutes, 1 minute, and so on and so forth. Rajeev, you're up next, 10 minutes.
Thank you, Abhijit. After that very comprehensive description and talks by respected Vibhuti Ji and MohanD Ji, I will now focus, let's say, on one part of that discussion. And let's go back 5 years, actually, to the early part of the first Modi government. I remember that in Jan 2015, Prime Minister Modi had asked that can we dream of becoming a 20 trillion GDP economy? So, that was obviously a big ambition. I think it was the first time that an Indian Prime Minister expressed such a vision. And as we stand here in 2020, 6 years later, 5 years later, we are at about 2.7 trillion GDP. We've seen an average GDP growth rate of about 7% in the last 5, 6 years, and maybe a little bit lower than that after the shock of the pandemic this year. But still, that $20 trillion ambition that was expressed by the Prime Minister, is that possible? So, can India, within a reasonable time frame in this century, transform essentially from about a $2,000 per capita economy right now to maybe 6, 7 times of that, to over $12,000 of per capita GDP, and that would take us closer to developed economy status, and also it would entail a complete socio-economic transformation of the country. Something, frankly, which I don't see many people even suggesting or talking about. And so one of the issues actually when we talk about India and its economic sort of capabilities is that I find in the intellectual class, in the class of economists and so on, there is not that kind of grand vision where they are thinking of these things. That can India become a rich country? Can we become a prosperous country? If so, what would it take? We're always thinking in terms of just taking small steps, and we're not thinking in terms of larger leaps. So my view is that 20 trillion GDP goal is achievable. I realize that it sounds a little ludicrous, especially in the time of a pandemic-driven economic crisis that we are experiencing right now. But please indulge me, and sort of I'll explain, how this may be achievable. So I would say there are two principal drivers right now in India, which are really helping set the stage for this kind of a transformation. The first is domestic economic liberalization at a speed which we've not seen, I would argue, from any government in the history of India. And the second is technology. So let's talk about technology first. When it comes to technology, India had always been a laggard. And we have MohanD ji on the panel, and I'm sure he'll agree with me that India traditionally used to be considered like a deployment market, where the global MNCs will come. They will come and sort of treat India as a captive market for themselves. There are hardly any Indian companies which are pushing back against them, developing products, developing services used on a global scale. But I think that is changing now for the first time in the history of the country. And even social attitudes towards business have been transformed in the last 10, 15 years. So today, if you see who are the youth icons in India, they are usually first generation entrepreneurs and wealth creators. So the young in India want to be like them and less like other vocations, such as politicians or bureaucrats or judges or in the legal field or whatever. So I would argue that becoming a wealthy sort of business person, a successful entrepreneur, is a dream for many Indians today on college campuses, which was less the case maybe 15, 20 years ago. The other big transformation we've seen, especially in the last 4 years, has been that now the internet is ubiquitous in India. So just this year, I think it's been a landmark year. Again, not commented upon very much because of all the news around the pandemic. But I think this was the year when India has crossed 50% of internet penetration in the population. And we also have the world's most advanced payments and financial inclusion program. So today, India's payments and kind of money transfer system is better than any country in the world. With the rise of the unified payment interface, powered also by the Jan Dhan Bank Yojana, started by the Prime Minister very early on in his first term. So all these things are coming together now. The pieces are coming together. The accessibility of access availability of internet, payment sort of infrastructure, all these pieces are now together. And then this digitization in the economy and the state also is making life easier for all Indians across domains and sectors. So your bank is now in your pocket in the smartphone, along with the shopping mall. And it doesn't matter whether you're in South Delhi or Darbhanga in Bihar, or you are in Mysore or any other place in India. Everyone is shopping in the same apps and using the same payment platforms and accessing the internet in the same way. So this is a transformation which we've never seen in the country. And then that wave of entrepreneurship is both expanding opportunity for wealth creation as well as providing that productivity multiplier which is necessary for India to develop itself. I think this is very critical to understand because we are doing things on a different scale altogether in India. We're talking about 138 crore Indians, and a copy paste model will not work. So that scale requires doing things in a fundamentally different way. If we think that we can just import something that worked in Western Europe or even sort of North America or something and just cut and paste it, deploy it in India, and all of us will be fine, I don't think that's going to work. In fact, I think India is going to have to invent its way to prosperity. So, talking more about specific reforms and changes in the infotech domain, we've seen the recent removal of the so-called other service provider, the OSP regulations. That has ended in Inspector Raj in the infotech industry, as one newspaper put it. That change will enable smaller IT businesses to become like sort of more global exporters. There will be new modes of services arbitrage possible from not just the conventional BPO that we all know about, but also as new technologies come with virtualization that we are already experiencing. With someone in, let's say, Bombay learning yoga or getting gym instruction from somebody in another part of the country. So if that can happen within a country, it can also happen all over the world. So I think there's going to be a lot of scope for both IT businesses as well as individuals to become service providers with the digitalization wave that we will see. And then you combine this with a program of internal liberalization and the moderate external protections, which is called Atmanirbhar Bharat. And for the first time, we are incentivizing manufacturing with a production-linked incentive program across sectors, as MohanD ji was describing. So there are early signs now that India is going to emerge as a leading exporter in hardware across categories that include smartphones, computing devices, consumer electronics, even home goods, air conditioners, and so on. So the structural reforms we have seen, which Vibhuti ji and MohanD ji touched upon earlier, concerning banking. We also talked a little bit about the problem of not sort of pushing privatization. That has been a concern, but it appears now that the government is driving it forward, driven by the fiscal kind of constraints it is facing. So the structural reforms we've also seen in agriculture and defense, for example. I think these are really revolutionary steps. These are two massive sectors that were completely closed off to private sector earlier, practically completely closed off. And now the government is saying we want India to become a defense exporter. That agriculture is a business, and this is a I'm quoting here from the Agriculture Minister of India, who said agriculture should be treated like a business. So I think that, along with the factor market changes we've seen in labor laws, all this put together will be transformational. 2020 will probably go down as a watershed year for economic reform, as I'm confident future historians will recognize. So in summary, the combination of the domestic economic liberalization push, all these changes in technology, the rise of entrepreneurship in India, all of this will catapult India into the economic big league globally. And for the first time in centuries, actually, the median Indian will soon think in terms of becoming rich. So rather than just thinking of survival, I think that is going to be a major psychological shift in the way Indians think, that we will think in terms of becoming rich. And I'm confident this will be India's decade and India's century. So that 20 trillion GDP goal can be achieved well before India's 100th independence anniversary in 2047. So as we stand in 2020, I see a lot of reason for optimism.
Thank you, Rajiv. So now we have two, I'd say, almost competing visions out here. We've had a sort of view of the future from Mohandas ji and Rajiv, and we've had a bit of a ways and means reality check from Vibhuti ji. Vibhuti ji, you'd know probably there's already one very, very good chamad in India called Napadori. Qatar Airways uses them for their business class product and, their amenities kit and all of that. And I think we even gave it to the heads of government, the monogrammed suitcases that they make and things like that. So that's good. But I did want to pose Vibhuti ji's ways and means argument to both Mohandas ji and Rajiv, specifically on two issues. We've talked about the next 15 to 20 years, But there is, this is economy in the 21st century. We've got to look at the entire 100 years. Sometime in 2050, we're meant to reach our population peak of about 1.5 billion. And then you're looking at a very, very serious dependency ratio problem set in. Right. So you're looking at two parallel things. One is the dependency ratio problem intersecting with the growth. At what point do you feel? I mean, what are the steps we can take right now to combat that one? And the second part of ways and means is education, because you've got severe market fragmentation here because of languages. You have to you maybe we may think we're a market of 1.3 billion, but then you've got to train up Telugu speakers, Telugu BPO speakers, and Tamil BPO speakers, and Malayalam BPO speakers, and Assamese BPO speakers, which leads to market fragmentation. But also the education system, because there's a big gap between the way our kids are being educated and the kind of learn by rote. Not to mention that we spend less than 1/50th or 1/60th of what education actually requires in this country for the number of kids coming up. So I was wondering, Mohandas ji and Rajiv, if you can focus on the ways and means now, specifically with regards to dependency ratio, growth, and education.
Abhijit, what you say about the dependency ratio is right. We will have enough young people coming the workforce till 2050, and then it will decline. And the latest data says it will decline faster than what earlier projections are. I agree with you. But let us remember one important thing. Technology is going to change the way people work. Already, artificial intelligence is simplifying processes and will destroy a lot of jobs. I'm not one of those who blindly believes that, like the industrial revolution, technology is going to change more jobs, because we are getting machines with intelligence now. In the industrial era, there were no machines with intelligence. They required human beings. Increased productivity created more jobs. Now there's a saturation. Remember, the industrial revolution, population was maybe 1.5, 2 billion people. Now we got world population of 7.6 billion people. So from now till 2050, we're going to see the advent of robotics. We're going to see artificial intelligence. We're going to see automation. We're going to see 3D printing, and a lot of jobs are going to go away. And today, there are three kinds of jobs. The first kind of jobs are the jobs for people who are very creative people. That will remain. The second kind of jobs are jobs for lower, wages job, like waiters and massier. That will remain. In the middle class job, which all of us want in an office, that's going to shrink. It has shrunk in the US. 10 million jobs have disappeared because of outsourcing and automation. And remember, so India too is going to have. So we're going to see in the next 50 years, by the time we come to the point when the dependency ratio come down, there'll be greater technology, there'll be more use of robots, more use of artificial intelligence, 21st century, more 3D printing, and that will reduce the number of jobs that we know. Are more jobs going to be created in high tech? No. There are going to be lesser number of jobs. And let's be very clear about that. All data says that. So to me, the problem will be solved. The bigger problem, Abhijit, is going to be, what do you do with the great mass of people who are not going to get good jobs? Because the high paying jobs that are required for India are just not going to be there. In the US too, they disappeared, and the gap between the rich and poor is going to expand. And the only solution will be something like a basic income, something like the DBT, where a larger number of people will get enough money to survive and to grow. And when the population rebalances, possibly by 2060, 2075, we probably will be much better off. So this hump that Vibhuti spoke about, this demographic dividend, there's going to be no demographic dividend for the next 20 years. Because the number of people coming in the workforce is very high. For the next 20 years, we're going to have 2.5 crore people attain the age of 21, because they've all been born. And when they come in the workforce, we need 1.5 crore jobs a year, and those jobs are not going to be there of the quality. And we are producing 90 lakh graduates. So let me say, it is a very critical thing. I don't want to be pessimistic, but we have to sort it out. And the second issue, we spoke about the education system. Well, the new education policy offers hope, but let me say, our gross enrollment rate is 26 today. Only 26% of 18 to 23 are getting into college. It'll go up to 50 by 2030, 2031. And the problem with India has been that we have, like you said, too much of rote learning. So we must use the new education policy to change in the schools, change in the education policy, so start seeing the benefits in the next few years. The language, like you say, the big constraint. When the Chinese can educate the children in Chinese, the German in German, the French in French, the Japanese in Japanese. Why are we failing? It's because we are not translated the world's language into local languages. Vibhuti, if the world's language, world's knowledge was in Hindi, you would have been, you don't require to learn English. You can only learn English as a language, not for content. We have not done that. So we must invest in translation. We must put that. Recently, I had a call from a regulator who said that they want to have an engineering course in Hindi. And I suggested that why don't you do the translations of all engineering content into Hindi so that people who know Hindi can learn all the content in their own language with words that can be used across languages and learn English as a language. Once you learn English as a language and content is their own language, you have solved this problem. That's the big challenge.
This is good because Sanjay sir gave me a brief to make you all fight a bit. And I think I've opened up some kind of gap between MohanD sir and Rajeev now, because MohanD sir insists that our per capita income, probably we're not going to see those high income jobs, which is also the session I hosted yesterday, which is what Jaggi also said. So Rajeev, now the spotlight is on you. Tumko jhagda karwaunga abhi. Where are you seeing this go? Because I think I've got both Jaggi, Vibhuti and MohanD sir now agreeing that we might have troubles with this sort of, wealth, a focus on wealth that you spoke about, rather than just survival.
No, so obviously MohanD ji, formidable intellect, and he has all those statistics on his fingertips, and it's sort of going up against him. I better have good arguments, so let me take a stab at it. So Abhijit, I come at it from a very techno-optimist kind of a perspective. I think like I mentioned in my sort of remarks as well, India is going to have to do things differently. So if we look to the rest of the world and see that how did they do it and can we do the same thing, I think we'll come up short for answers. I think it's going to be one of the great creative challenges in a way of how do you take a country of 138 crore people and sort of transform to sort of kind of at least middle income status, if not high income status, in about 25 years. So having said that, I do think it is possible because the rate at which technology is advancing, the techno-optimist that I am, it gives me great confidence that the problem of jobs, well, yes, we probably wasted too much time in the last 15, 20 years, debating things which were frankly quite obvious. Everyone knew that labor laws need to be relaxed, but finally it has happened in 2020. As Vibhuti ji was saying, कुछ ज्यादा ही शायद हम लोग विवाद करने लग जाते हैं और कुछ बात आगे नहीं बढ़ती, ऐसा होता है इंडिया में. तो but finally it is done now. Maybe the pandemic was a catalyst in that sense for kind of sidelining many interest groups which were trying to block such change, and we've managed to deliver that. But let me give you an example of how, and I've written about this at length. It's also there in my new book, co-authored with my friend Harsh Madhusudan, A New Idea of India. We talk about how there can be a new kind of services arbitrage possible because of virtualization, because of all the new technologies that are coming. So I give the example of, let's say, somebody in Bombay or Delhi learning yoga from, let's say, some instructor in rural Bihar or in Tamil Nadu. Right, so the same thing can also happen on an international scale, and I have friends in California and in New York who are actually, let's say, learning Indian dance from instructors in India. Now, this is still all very small. It is maybe happening on a kind of scale which is not registering in the statistics, and maybe when we look back some years from now, it will become more obvious that this is a category. But I would say this is coming because one thing the pandemic has done is it has normalized virtual sort of instruction, virtual learning. People have become more open-minded about that. So learning yoga from a person who's on the other side of the world on Zoom is okay somehow now, because anyway you can't go to your local yoga studio, right? So let's see how all of this manifests. And I mean, what I think is most important is India should keep doing, or the government and the both business community in India needs to keep doing what we can do, which is business community needs to sort of be a little risk taking, be a little bit more open-minded, sort of uh, be more innovation centric. The government needs to sort of keep stepping back, become regulator, facilitator, and essentially just leave people alone as long as they're not doing something unlawful, right? So I think if we keep doing that, then I think human ingenuity will surprise us in the ways that people find or invent to make a living, to create new businesses. That has been the history of the world, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because the history has been that every time somebody's predicted gloom and doom, new markets have emerged. So, I was reading a very interesting piece that said COVID is the end of business class as we know it. Because no company, after seeing that they could do business remotely during COVID, no company is now willing to shell out $3,000-4,000 on a return ticket with lounge access and all of that, and put in that additional money into airline pockets and so on and so forth. And for airlines, that's disastrous because business class is where most of the profits are made. But taking this, what Mohandas sir and Rajiv have said to Vibhuti, where are you seeing this going? Where do you feel that a lot of this is uh, ambitious, but are we actually seeing? So, for example, Rajiv said, we can do this, we need to do this. Are you seeing those reforms keep pace, or the changes keep pace with what actually needs to happen? Do you actually see the Indian government anytime in the near future completely taking a backseat to people's lives? Because what Mohandas sir seemed to indicate was that we might actually need a bit more uh, government intervention given the increasing gap, the increasing wage gap.
The government needs to act, which is definitely true. There is no way we can say the government doesn't have a role and a responsibility. The question is what kind of role and responsibility that comes in. That's the most important part. Pumping money in Air India or banks that have piled up non-performing assets is not a solution to the problem. We have to bring in efficiency and effectiveness. I mean, earlier I said performance, productivity, and profitability. I'm also adding to that you need to understand the concept of capital efficiency and effectiveness, and efficiency and effectiveness all across the board. That's important to understand if you want to realize the full potential part of it. Now, let me give you two scenarios. Like Milton Friedman's famous statement is that if you allow the government to run Sahara Desert, there will be shortage of sand in 2 years, 2 or 3 years. So the government has a limited role to play. And that's where the entrepreneurship of people like Mohan, Rajiv, me, you, and everybody else in India has to be unleashed. I definitely agree with Rajiv that, can we achieve 20 trillion economy? Yes, of course we can. But are we achieving it in a realistic time frame? It's like saying that I want to lose 80 kilos tomorrow. It's not happening. But it has to be a realistic assessment of what can be done. And I use the cricket analogy here, is that you play T20 differently, you play one day differently, and you play 5-day test match differently. If you were to play 5-day test match with a one-day mentality, you are done. So the question here is very important, for which areas the government must pull back and say, now onwards, go forward. It has to be, as you very rightly said, in the role of a facilitator, not as a role of an active interventionist. And that takes me to certain other conversations that have happened in the past in this forum in the last 5 days, is that how the Indian administrative service and the bureaucracy becomes the MyBop of the whole system. Let the people flourish. Let them do what they want, pull back from there. And I'll give you an example. I was a keynote speaker at one of the international seminars in 2007, distinct memory. That was a time when we were notching up 9% growth rate. And I was asked this question, that how would India define two things for me? What does opportunity mean in Indian context? And how will India cope up with the 9% growth rate if it doesn't have enough skilled people? So the Prime Minister has taken initiatives to bring about skill development across the country. Along with that, what also needs to come is respect for the jobs people do. If the sanitation department people don't clean up my yard, my home stinks. we have to have respect for people who are performing jobs that nobody else will do. So here was an example of opportunity which I gave to the audience, that in the Indian context and the US context, US has a population base of 350 million. There were 6,780 aircrafts serving the flying needs of Americans. India had a population of 1.2 billion at that time, and we had 350 aircraft serving the flying needs. Similarly, with the hospitality industry, same database. India had about 100,000 one-star to five-star hotel rooms. Vegas alone had 100,000 rooms. So you see the opportunity that we are talking about. And if India were to focus on developing domestic tourism itself, it would bring about respect for your own culture, temple sites growing, hotels industry. You have so many backward and forward linkages of industry and business that India will achieve much more than what we are expecting. So we have to do the right things. It's not about talking about it. We have enough knowledge, education, intelligence, wherewithal, everything else. We need not suffer from educated incapacity. And that's my favorite phrase, that we might end up suffering from educated incapacity, too much knowledge, but nowhere, all dressed up and nowhere to go. That's the theme that I'm trying to talk about. For youth, for young people, for example, we do a program here about fitment. I tell young people, my son was my teacher. I said, when it comes to teaching you, identify your talent. Everybody has a God-given talent. Not everybody can become a Virat, Sachin, or a Roger Federer. But you have a talent, build your skill sets around it, and run it by your value systems. These are the mool months for the people to grow. Don't look for a job. You will ultimately get a job. That's not an issue. But build a life. If you build a life, you have things going for you. And that's the focus which I want to make about it here. And today I'm willing to make an offer here to Jaipur Dialogues and all of you here, that I'm willing to run camps in India where youth can identify their talent. And I'll give an example, a quick example. Public speaking is a skill. Politicians do, MohanD ji does, Rajeev does, I do. We all do public speaking, right? But there are different sets of public speaking skills required for various different jobs. A lawyer needs to have a public speaking skill. Lawyer needs to have a sense of humor. Lawyer has to need a sense of repartee, understanding the case studies, and then influencing the jury or the judge without the authority to do so. You see the point which I'm trying to make? So you have to have many skill sets to develop around it, and India needs that for its talent to be maturing, to be growing, and to build that entrepreneurial skill set. I'm willing to run a camp in India. Take me up on that.
Brilliant. So before we head over to the audience questions, what I'm going to do is we've got three very, very distinct points of view that have emerged. Initially, I thought MohanD sir and Rajeev were on the same page, and clearly they're not. Good fun. So one of the things I'd like you to commit to, especially you, Rajeev, because there was a lot of hone wala hai, shayad hoga, etc., is give me, each of you, 5 clear policies that you'd like to see. And how are we going to benchmark your predictions? Because each one of you have made certain predictions. What should we look forward to in the next 5 to 10 years to, assess that the government is actually going in that direction rather than having just ossified after a certain point, for a variety of reasons, political as well. MohanD sir, we'll start with you.
Abhijit, I do believe India will reach $10,000 middle income by possibly 2035. It will be a stretch, but we have a great chance. But are we going to reach $40,000, $50,000 by 2060? That is a very, very remote possibility, because for $40,000, we want to be a $60 trillion economy. The world is today 82 trillion. It is growing at 3%. So we have to grow at a faster pace to reach that by 2050, and that's the stretch. So, I just want to say I'm optimistic, but I'm not so optimistic that we'll be at, American standards or whatever it is in the next 40 years. Now, what are the 5 things? First thing, very, very important, we are short of capital. Our bank lending is only about 50% of GDP. China's bank lending is 300% of GDP. We must solve the problem of shortage of capital. We can't suffer like this. China invests $65 billion a year in venture. America, $135 billion. We get only $12 billion, and 90% comes from overseas. So we have to solve that. And to solve that, we have to open up India. Government has to go take 30 years, 40-year money from Japan and other places to do that and get in more money to come into the country. The second important thing what we got to do is we got to make sure that we invest in education, in research. We are under-investing in research. The future is going to be in IP. The future is going to be in innovation. We have to spend money, at least 10, 20,000 crores in research. We are spending about 3 to 4,000 crores a year in research in the universities. We got to go up 3x. So we will bring in PhDs. We will bring in high quality innovation. And that is going to drive, because the future is going to be innovation. That is the next thing. The third thing is we have to develop North India. Now, if I looked at this data by states, in North India today, the population is growing at about 2.4, 2.5%. The whole of the South is growing at fertility is 1.7%, North is 2.4%. UP graduates 15 lakh young people, 60% of them are women. There are no jobs in the north of this country. So we got to get the jobs in the north of the country by having labor-intensive industries, putting in more infrastructure, because the south and the north, Bihar's per capita income is 49,000 rupees, UP is 69,000 rupees, Karnataka is 250,000 rupees. Now, this disparity is so high because the population is very large. We got to invest there to create, labor-intensive. That's the third point. And the fourth thing that what we are going to do, very importantly, is we got to urbanize very fast. Our urbanization is 35%. The world is 52%. China is 59%. We got to develop the 7,000 small towns. Not the big towns. Don't get more people. The 7,000 small census towns, urbanize them, put in good infrastructure, bring in the roads, invest in them heavily, and get in the labor-intensive industry to take care of the surplus labor that is there, so that the labor that is available there can be productively given jobs. And if we give them job paying 10, 15,000 rupees in a smaller town, that's perfectly fine. And that will take care of the job needs. And we will make a surplus country, product surplus country to export to the outside market. And the last thing that we have to do, very importantly, like Vibhuti said, and maybe Rajeev also said, is we have to reduce the compliance load up here on all the industry. Manish Sabharwal wrote a paper where he said 60,000 compliance are there for industry. Bring it down to 10,000, consolidate, cut down government intervention. Like Vibhuti said, let the creative energy of the people free. If we do these 5 things, I think India can grow much, much faster.
Wonderful. Vibhuti sir, what are you're a fellow pessimist. So what are 5 things you would like to see which would give you hope? Just the 5 top things. Don't worry about how they blend into other policies and things like that. Just even 3 is good, but 3 to 5 things that you think would give you hope that we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you for this. I always consider myself an incorrigible optimist, but you branded me yourself along with you. So I'm in a good company of the pessimists, so no problem about that. But having said that, one of the things that the government must do is we know that the soul of India lives in the villages. Urbanization is a bigger problem, and MohanD mentioned about that urbanization. I'm saying that there's a definite step the government can take. 100 smart cities are being developed, right? Significant investment has been made. I'm saying segregate political capital with business capital. That will make a significant difference in urban development and movement of people, and also infrastructure development. So let's for a moment assume that Bangalore is the business capital of Karnataka and Mysore becomes the political capital. You suddenly found people's mobility infrastructure will develop between the 2 cities in a big way. Think about Bihar. I gave the example of Mohandas-ji's state. I'm giving my example of Bihar. If Patna was the political capital, make the business capital to Darbhanga or vice versa. Think about it from that point of view. Or Jamshedpur and Ranchi. Or I don't know where Rajiv belongs to, but let's put it this way, Maharashtra. I remember a conversation that happened in Gokhale Institute where I was doing my studies. Professor Dandekar took on Yashwantrao Chauhan, who was the finance minister, that minus Bombay, Maharashtra is as backward as Odisha and Bihar. Today, the same situation continues. So if Maharashtra were to shift its political capital to Nagpur, think about the infrastructure development. That's one thing as part of the urbanization and smart cities development can happen, that you begin to earmark that the new cities are going to be the business or political capital, vice versa. The second thing which I wanted to talk about is that we need to, definitely avoid the organizational and individual traps. The organizational trap is all about the bureaucracy. Without bureaucracy, nothing moves in India. That's a big organizational trap, that we are the protectors of country's interest. Think about it like this. In the United States, private sector is the where confidentiality, secret defense industry develops. In India, it was all with the government. Think about how corruption seeped in there. So this my bap attitude that I know best for what is for the country, and you and I, because we are in private sector, don't do that, is total rubbish. I will tell you there are so many examples. This is a favorite topic of mine. I can talk for hours, but I'll stop here now by saying that these are the two traps. And then we have to harness the human evolution in India, because that's what is going to shift the paradigm for the whole world. Because we are Sanatanis. Look at it this way. I have told this to my people, Christians and Muslims, that we are a way of life. You are still stuck in religion. The day you evolve from where you are, you will become Sanatanis too. And that's the important part. That is, our marketing of our thought processes has been very poor. I have been told by any number of Bible Belt Christians and Muslims, Jha Sahab, why don't you explain your faith to us, because it makes sense? I said, because we are stupid. We don't market ourselves. Our ability to not market ourselves, hum aise hi hain, khush rahenge, is the most debilitating factor for India. We need to tell the world what our philosophy is. And I think Prime Minister Modi explained the concept of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam in a remarkably wonderful way on the International Solar Day Alliance meeting, when he said there is one sun, one earth, one great. That's the definition that we have to reach to the world. It's same H2O, it's same water for everybody. So we have to market ourselves, our values and our virtues in a big way, which will give us Atma Samman, Atma Nirbharta, Atma Vishwas, and Swabhiman. These are the factors which are missing from the Indian psyche. And I can tell you this because, when I came to this country in 91, I became a better Hindu, I became a better Indian, I became a better human. Because that's where I realized the value of our education that we missed to convey to the world around us. Thank you.
And Rajeev, you get the final word, see, before we go into the question and answers. But I'll give you the final word even at the end. Yeah.
So 5 policy changes, Abhijit. So the first one I would say is direct tax reform. And the focus, I think, should be for the government to have a broader base and sort of lower rates. I think a marginal tax rate of over 43% for an economy of our size, for a stage of development that we are at, is simply too high. I think India should incentivize those who have excess capital to invest more, and rather than sort of government taking 43% of their income. And there's also a lot of scope for rationalizing the taxation of capital assets in India. This is an issue which MohanD, for example, has raised multiple times in various op-eds and forums. I think it's critical actually, and it sounds a little esoteric and narrow, but actually it is very important because tax policy often directs investment choices that are made by companies and individuals. So I think that's actually a reform of direct taxes will actually be like a meta reform, because that will change how capital allocation is being done by companies and individuals in India. So the second policy I would suggest is liberalization in higher education. I think we're already seeing a bit of that with the new education policy announced this year. But the goal really for India should be to have at least 10 world-class research-driven institutions in top 25 in the world. Right now, what is happening is, I find it very bizarre that in India, if someone from IIT, like one of the IIT sort of joint entrance exam toppers, rejects IIT and chooses to go to MIT, in a celebratory way, the media is kind of talking about it. That look, this person is actually going to MIT. It's so awesome. What we're not realizing is we are losing our people. We are losing the best talent we have. Which we need to make space for that talent to work in India, to work for Indian industry. But here we are in a popular culture sense, we are celebrating the exit from the country almost. So connected to that actually is the third policy. And again, I've also written about this a few times. I think India should have a residency program for the world's best human capital to come here and work here, to build companies in India, to work at Indian companies. And for that, again, we need to ditch the remittance economy mindset, where we are always focused on let's send our people abroad, they will send us remittances. I think we've thought like that for too long, and that's not how like a rising greed power should be thinking. So, in fact, we should be a magnet for talent across Southeast Asia, South Asia. I mean, why can't we get Cambodians, Thais, Indonesian engineers to come and work in the Bangalore tech industry? So the fourth policy is, privatization broadly speaking. So strategic versus non-strategic industries should be clearly defined, and the government should simply exit the non-strategic industries. This was already committed in the Atmanirbhar Bharat announcements made in May. So we are still waiting to hear which industries will be strategic and non-strategic. I hope most of the industries will be counted in non-strategic areas, and all those PSUs need to be sold. The fifth and final thing, I think, is something to society, actually, specifically, not really government. And echoing what Mr. Pai said on that private sector sort of, I think the private sector actually needs to step up more on R&D investment. In some ways, they should be incentivized or even pushed by government policy by injecting competition into industries. So I think once there's more competition, then automatically you will find that companies are trying to do inventive stuff. I think the reason they don't do inventive stuff is they don't need to do that stuff, right? So why should they? So corporate India actually needs to put far more capital into R&D and innovation and intellectual property development. So India is at a very low level actually compared to other economies when it comes to R&D sort of output by the private sector. So those would be my 5 policy changes.
Thank you, Rajeev. And while you all were discussing, the Indian infrastructure decided to announce its presence, and the electricity has failed in Abhijit's house, and his inverter also got exhausted. So here I am to complete the formalities. And now we go straight into the question answer rounds. The good news is that this kind of a heavy economy session is right now having more than 600 people connected and watching, which is way more than ET now ever got.
Oh, Sanjay, your brand is very good.
Yes, indeed.
So now we go into question and answer.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
So thank you, viewers, once again. I request you to please share, subscribe, like, and of course, press the bell icon. And this session is sponsored by Srimati Sri Lakshmi and Sri Venkata Rao. And the first question is from Satyajit. He is asking, do you think India had missed a big financial opportunity in comparison with Bangladesh? And I think each 3 of you can take a shot at it. Brief 1-liner or 2-liner, if you please.
No, Sanjay. I think, look, that's an aberration. It's just that the GDP came down. The IMF said next year India is going to be much better. I don't know why the leftist media is making a big deal. Bangladesh is not a very sophisticated economy compared to India. And Bangladesh should be compared with Bengal. Compared to Bengal, Bengal's industry is much, much better than Bangladesh. So I think you should just let it by, and it is not very material.
Okay, Rajeev.
No, I would put it very simply. Do you find Bangladeshis wanting to come to India, or do you find Indians wanting to go to Bangladesh? How are people putting their feet? I think the answer is clear, and I agree. I mean, there's much to learn from Bangladesh actually for India in terms of what they've done with government exports. Built an industry from scratch. They've done very well, and we should learn from the example. But I don't think I agree with MohanD ji that Bangladesh properly is comparable to an Indian state. I mean, India is a far, far bigger country. And while we need to take lessons from them on how they've developed that garment industry, I think that comparison is probably not very fair.
Right. Vibhuti Ji, you have a take?
I agree with both of them.
Okay, that's wonderful. Next question. Siddhant. Chanakya's Arthashastra is the most successful economic model India had ever seen. What's stopping the government from following in his footsteps? Why is it more leftist than even the left? Now I'll go the other way. Vibhuti Ji, you take it first.
Yeah, I mean, one of my pet themes is that while we forgot Kautilya's Arthashastra, which is our own text, we read Adam Smith. So in my master's and my graduation in economics, we were studying all Western economies. There was no Indian thought process. And as many times it has happened in the conversation, in the previous conversation, there was that the leftist ideology dominates the world. And there is a political reason for that. Because in the political reason, it's very easy to promise to give what you don't have in the leftist ideology. So they talk about, giving one person one vote, and that's why they are able to promise. The leftist ideology becomes very romantic. It is not driven for performance. Government does it. So as a result of which, because we got circumscribed by the Russian model, we talk about social all the time. We forgot the concept of efficiency, effectiveness, and all that. So, yes, you are right. Absolutely. For the businesses to succeed, you have to abandon certain principles of the left. I mean, it doesn't require a rocket scientist to figure that out. So I would just say stop at that yes, leftist ideologies, we have to go back to our own core literature, which is there in our country. We are ignoring it because we are so dominated by the Western thought process, even so much so that, I've been told by many chairmen and CEOs of the company, bring the best from around the world. I said, no, develop your own. You have everything out there.
Okay, Rajiv.
No, so I would say the reason, I think there's a broad recognition in the government, in at least in the top echelons of the government, in society as well, that why are we like this? But I think it just comes down to interest groups. There's something called the Lindy effect. When something has persisted for a certain amount of time, it is likely to persist for the same amount of time. So undoing sort of those kind of wrongs and wrong policies and stuff, it's a very challenging sort of minefield to navigate. It may require a sledgehammer approach. It may require a more surgical approach. But I think slowly we are sort of maybe winding that back, if I had to be a little optimistic.
MohanD ji.
Sanjay, my view is most of the IAS, most of the bureaucracy have not read the Arthashastra. More of the political class have not read the Arthashastra. They don't know the Indian thesis because Arthashastra is based upon the Indian psyche and Indian civilization. It works in India if you follow the principles. They blindly go after the Western part because they think the West is successful and we are a failure. Now, why are we considered a failure? Because of colonial exploitation. And the colonial exploitation has created a mind which is free of anything to do with India. It's all a slave mentality mind. So the first thing we have to do is make Arthashastra mandatory for every college student in every college in this country. Make it mandatory for the IAS and all the bureaucracy. And the UGC should have, not the UGC, the examination body for the IAS. What was that called? I mean,
UPSC.
UPSC.
Yeah, they must make sure that they have a paper on the Arthashastra, so everybody reads the Arthashastra. And I think even a parliamentarian should have a course to read the Arthashastra. Once you read that, you understand the fundamental principles of running a society. It's not very difficult. It's very, because Chanakya, Kautilya speaks about the fundamental thing, very simple processes. And once you do that, I think we'll all change and we'll probably get better policies suited to this country, which people relate to. The ordinary people relate to that, Sanjay, but our bureaucracy and the rulers don't relate to it. That's the problem. We got to solve this problem first.
In defense of the bureaucracy,
you have read it.
No, what I want to say that after retirement, I got an opportunity to deliver a corporate lecture, my first corporate lecture, and that I did on Arthashastra.
Oh.
So if you take me as the relevant model,
not you.
Right sample, then
you are very rare. You are a rare person.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we got 3 questions, so one to each of you. Next one. Deepak Guru, Shri Mohandas Pai. Okay, so he's specifically asking you. So your quota is exhausted with this. Should the AATC long-term investment limit, associated income tax deduction limit, be increased from current level of 1.5 lakhs?
Sanjay, I don't believe government policy should dictate by tax where you should invest, what you should do. I would say abolish ATC, expand the tax slab up to 5 lakhs, no tax, 5 to 10 lakhs, 10%, 10 lakhs to 15%, 15 lakhs, 20%, and about 20, 30, and remove off all these exemption. Let people decide where to spend based on what they do. Because, this ATC and all the thing is enforced spending. For example, I'll tell you, if you take out an endowment policy, the returns you get are peanuts, right? If you take a pure life insurance policy, you're better protected. So I think, I don't believe in this. Simplify the tax, remove all this, and open it up, and you'll see magic.
Right. Okay. Vibhuti Ji. People are now asking questions by name. That's good. When you're starting that public speaking seminars, from which rural zones?
When am I starting? Okay. I'm willing to start anytime. I'm willing to collaborate. I need definitely the ground forces, and I'm willing to share that. So when will I start? Whenever you are ready to call me.
And wherever you're ready to call me, right?
Absolutely.
So the next question, by default, goes to Rajeev. Your thoughts on steps for human capital development, role of government in this, and if not, then how do we incentivize private capital, especially in backward areas?
No, so there's human capital development, obviously a very broad sort of phrase, right? So it probably encompasses all education if you think about it in that broad sense. So I think one thing we should do is get rid of this hypocrisy that you can't make money in education. Let there be for-profit schools. Obviously, let them be properly regulated, but let there be for-profit institutions, both for schools as well as for higher education. And generally speaking, I think the reason in the Indian system has been failing is the government tends to fund schools and not students. So what the government should do is essentially fund students, right? So the way we are doing direct benefit transfers into the account of the qualified recipient, even students can get that direct benefit. Even they can be given money to spend on schools, and where they spend the money is their choice. Whether they spend on private school, whether government school. So instead of funding and subsidizing sort of public schools or even public universities, let's give money to students and let them have the freedom to choose.
Right. So that brings us to the end of this episode. And it's been a wonderful episode. I've never seen this kind of a response towards this kind of a heavy economy session. And thank you, MohanD ji, and Rajeev ji, and Vibhuti ji. And with Vibhuti ji, we have had a very riveting series on the US elections. And now after this summit is over, we're going to do a mop-up. So thank you once again, and thank you to our sponsors, Shri Lakshmi ji and Shri Venkatarao, and thank you to all viewers. I'm just reminding you that 10 o'clock is our concluding session of this summit, and do join in. Thank you very much. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.
Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.